one university, one city, has more small and medium-sized enterprises around it as a honeypot that make up a greater GDP than South Africa or Thailand. One university. Up the road, 5 miles up the road, is Harvard. It's another university. Got the idea. Go to Caltech in California, you'll see very similar numbers. So what we try and do at some of these universities is create an environment in which entrepreneurship can flourish. Everything we know and love, you know, Formula One, Eurofighter, Toyota, everything's manufactured, it's made. It's made with a huge supply chain, largely of entrepreneurs. So why is manufacturing so important? Well, we think there are 5 unique characteristics that other sectors don't have. First of all, there's an infinite demand for manufactured goods. And guess what? The Chinese have figured that out. And that's why they have produced, in the last 15 years, a huge manufacturing sector to export to the rest of the world. Britain now has the worst balance of trade since 1690. So that's a real problem when you're actually importing more than you're exporting. It drives innovation and entrepreneurship. You can't have innovation unless you actually go and make something. It's completely pointless. You can't have entrepreneurship unless you're adding value somewhere to this chain. It has a powerful internal dynamic, therefore driving other sectors. So even if it's a service sector or it's a manufacturing sector, if you've got a car industry, as I say, you'll have 10 or 12 jobs outside driven by every one worker working in that factory. The balance of payments deficit is a real crisis. And I was brought up in an era where you export or die. Prime Ministers talked about this constantly and incessantly since the Second World War. The last 25 years, basically nobody wants to talk about it. But when you have a balance of payments deficit, as we do today, it's a crisis of considerable proportion. And the only way to return us to that is rebalance the economy and to actually start making things again. Finally, it creates high-value jobs and support industries. There's a real difference between stacking shelves in a supermarket and working at Airbus or Rolls-Royce in Bristol. These are fundamentally different jobs. Because if you have a low-value job with low pay, the state has to actually top your pay up every week with tax returns. And Winston Churchill used to say, doing this is like standing in a bucket, pulling yourself up by the handle. And that's what we've been trying to do. So when you see we've just got another million jobs, 1.4 million, a huge number of those jobs are low-value jobs having to be propped up by the taxpayer. So this is a real issue of we have to rethink how we get back to making things and creating wealth. From 1970, 36% of what we did, GDP in this country, was manufacturing or related to manufacturing. And as you see, a huge number of people used to go to work each day just working in the factory. Guess what? They stopped working in those factories around about the mid-1980s. Their children no longer have jobs and their grandchildren don't have jobs. So we disenfranchise huge numbers of people in the labour market that rely on social security benefits or disability benefits, quite often, since the middle of the 1980s. The problem was then, by 85 to 87, is how are we going to make a living? And this became a real debate working with government, is what on earth are we going to do to make a living in the future? You know, we've got a living standard which we must maintain for political, apart from economic reasons. So what do you do now? So we see a possibility of trying to fill this gap with entrepreneurship. But the problem is that we start to see a huge crisis come out of the 1980s and out of the 1990s. So we're now seeing that we've replaced basically manufacturing with financial institutions. And the financial institutions were of course given by 1986-87, the Big Bang. So we could actually deregulate or light touch regulate the banking and financial institutions. So by 86, we deregulated the financial markets. By 2008, by September 2008, we see the collapse of Lehman's. And what astonished us as researchers between this period, that it took so long. We gave the Big Bang 7 to 10 years to actually bankrupt this country. Because if you allow the children to run the sweet shop, guess what's going to happen? And that's what we did. We didn't replace those jobs. We didn't replace the low-value jobs with people going to factories, going through all the supply chain. So we had massive structural unemployment. And we didn't replace the wealth creation. we actually found ourselves with a real crisis. And the wake-up call came in September 2008. So we start to see a massive crisis of Western capitalism. We see it in the United States and we see it in Britain. We see the takeover of Merrill Lynch and Bank of America, nationalisation of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. This is 50% of the 12 trillion mortgage market in the United States. I mean, these are unimaginable numbers that we're starting to see collapse. The Bank of England offers 5 billion emergency lending, which they actually don't have, you know. But we then see 50 billion wiped off London shares, all overnight. The FTSE falls 212 points and we lose 5,000 jobs at Lehman. Biggest collapse of jobs in one organisation since Rover Group. The lending game finally stops. This is a game of musical chairs, you figured this out, and this is a game of musical chairs where there's not enough chairs. The UK, and this is a paper we wrote 6 years ago, and I've put it up here so you can all say we were wrong, but the numbers are almost spot on for this year. UK has a 175 billion budget deficit, say worst balance of trade deficit since 1690, and we're now owing over 1.3 trillion. HM Treasury has spent 117 billion buying bank shares. UK taxpayer liabilities is 850 billion. Family liability is now going from where we started in 2008 from about £5,000 to over £40,000 per family at this rate. And the killer statistic is this last one. We only paid off the debt for the Second World War in December 2006. Now, all of us, or most of us in this room, have been paying off this debt one way or another. And I was happy to pay this debt off for two reasons. A, I didn't have to fight it, my parents did, you know. And secondly, I thought it was worth fighting. You know, I thought it was worth defeating Nazi Germany. I'm not sure our children and our grandchildren and the unborn are going to be happy to pay off this debt, because that's what we're asking them to do now. And it's not our children that are going to pay this off, and it's not our grandchildren, it is the unborn. And that is immoral. But what we do know is the UK is creating only 50% of the new businesses compared with the rest of Europe. And believe me, when you look at the rest of the world, it's about 5%. If you look at China, South Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, if you look at the United States, if you look at Brazil, if you look at the BRIC countries, it's astonishing how many new businesses are being built. A lot of ministers, government ministers and academics still think we can save ourselves with the knowledge economy. And I've called it the knowledge economy delusion, after a famous book from Oxford, where the myth is the economy based on creating, evaluating, trading knowledge. That's what we'll do for the future, apparently. And the UK sells knowledge and makes nothing, but has skills that other countries will pay for. So, you know, the Indians and the Chinese will build our cars, but we'll design them all here. You know, suitcases, whatever it is. The reality, of course, is that China and India train more than 500,000 engineers and graduates a year. We train 20,000. And as I say, half of those disappear when we train them. So we've ended up with 10,000 engineers. We need 100,000. That's what we've got. But we've got 100,000 hairdressers. But, you know, there's only so many times we can cut each other's hair with the low-value jobs. The steam engine was the knowledge economy. We can't try and explain to ministers this on a daily basis. What we did with the steam engine, we took Newtonian physics. We understood Isaac Newton. We took Newtonian physics. We took coal out of the ground, and we took iron ore out of the ground, and we built a steam engine. And then, you know what we did? We built steamships and railways, and it revolutionised wealth creation around the world. But the good news is this. And we've done a lot of research into the last century of revolutionary change in the world, how you create wealth. And it starts here in the 1900s from craft production, dear old Henry Royce, to mass production, Henry Ford. Bill Gates is the richest man in the world as an entrepreneur because he figured this out years ago when he was in Boston. And he worked out you need to attract capital and you will need to attract the best engineers and managers very fast, turn over that product very fast, and return that capital into the markets. And that's what he's been doing. So this area here is really, really dynamic when you actually want to be creating some wealth as an entrepreneur. So what happens is, if you're a bank, if I'm Goldman Sachs, where am I going to invest in here? I'm going to invest down here, never see the money back, so I'm going to invest down here. If I'm an engineer at university, where I want to go and work? I want to work down here. So what we're trying to do, a lot of our work is trying to speed up all this. It's instant gratification as well for the customer. The customer want a car in 3 days or 5 days. They don't want to wait 6 months for a car. because you don't know how many customers you lose. So the key to success that we found that covers all these companies that are really successful is this. And I think you talk a lot about this, don't you? Leadership and how you do this. And we found there are 3 elements of this in all our research. The first one is vision, and it better be the right vision, not the wrong vision. So you need the research to do that. The second is professional knowledge, and the third is integrity. And out of all the studies we've done, we found basically that having the right vision and goals is absolutely vital, and research is required to do that, knowing which part of that dynamic we just talked about, or can you fill in the previous slide. Targets should be clearly articulated and build short, medium and long-term strategies. So often people just build tactics from day to day, week to week, month to month, and often that's driven by the banks as well. So we have to look at bridging this gap between government as well and the financial institutions to give us medium and long-term strategies, as they do in Korea, as they do in Japan, and even in the United States. The professional knowledge is created by cadre of specialists, and we don't have enough specialists, as we know. And that's why we're here this evening, to try and create cadres of specialists that can go out and be entrepreneurs, work out where the best returns come. Eliminating the frozen layer of management in industry is really important, and you can do that as an entrepreneur. When I go into a company, I say, who's got control of this company and who's got the knowledge in it? And they're always separate people, and they're separated by this frozen layer of management, which is basically risk averse. So we try and collapse the people with the control and the people with the knowledge. And of course, entrepreneurs can start off by seeing that vision, not building that huge layer of management in it. So we employ the scientific method, we keep testing against reality and coming back and checking against reality constantly with the scientific method. And that's of course what the banks didn't do. The banks, there was an encouragement of financial innovation, there was a complexity of products, a concealment of reality, and a culture driven by a bankruptcy of integrity. And it was built on the fact you didn't use the scientific method. And if you think a lot of the great entrepreneurs that have collapsed, a lot of the great companies, Enron, for example, exactly the same. A complete bankruptcy of integrity. Bob Maxwell, Mirror Group, a complete and utter bankruptcy of integrity. So you can have the vision, you can have the professional knowledge, but if you're dishonest in this business, we have found one company after another goes down finally with that. I could give you 50 companies that we've studied where the bankruptcy of integrity has been the key to success or failure. Strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, but tactics without strategy is the noise before defeat. So we try and build a lot of the entrepreneurs that we've studied, that they're actually not joining tactics together with the word however, they're building medium and long-term strategies. And as I understand what you're trying to do here tonight is exactly what you're trying to do, to build up something for the future that is really going to plug this gap, really give us the ability to get back to making things, to creating wealth, and actually having a different lifestyle than we're actually going to have without that. Because please believe me, the future is very bleak unless we do this. So there's a real imperative to do it, and we need this cadre of specialists to go out there and make that change. We really do have a dearth of entrepreneurs at the present moment. There's no structure to actually encourage them or train them, and I think that's really what's needed. And we need this on a really large scale across the United Kingdom at the present moment if we're going to get back to wealth creation and to really challenge the rest of the world with innovation and technical change and new ways of thinking about making a living. I've worked in this sector most of my life, really, and certainly since the 1980s. We've done a lot of research in the United States and at the University of Bath here on really looking at best practice across the world. So we know what a best practice is, and we know we're not doing it at the present moment. But we've really made, I think, a start, certainly since September 2008 and the banking crisis. It's really brought people's brains together to think of a new way of really thinking the unthinkable and changing the world. And I think entrepreneurs will be at the sharp end of that. They're risk takers, and that's what we need. New ideas, not risk averse, but very, very exciting future.